Welcome to the Homeschool with Moxie podcast. On the Homeschool with Moxie podcast, our goal is to inspire and encourage you with actionable strategies to take you from overwhelmed to confident in your homeschool adventure. I'm your host, Abby Banks, and this is episode 284. You can find the show notes at 4onemore.com/284. I have a question for you. Are you trying to teach any kids how to read? Or do you have a wiggly kid in the mix? You know, as homeschool parents, we can teach multiple kids in the same household how to do things, how to read, and we kind of assume they're all going to learn the same way until we figure out, hey, all these kids are different, and what learned for one kid might not work for the next one. I know we have been in that boat in our homeschool over the years, and maybe you can relate. Well, today's episode is a great treat for you if you're teaching any kids how to read. We have educator and author Stefanie Hohl as our guest. Let me give you a little bit about Stefanie's background before we jump into our chat. Stefanie has a master's in education in curriculum and instruction with an emphasis in children's literature. She also has an MFA in writing. And after years of teaching preschool co-ops, a bit of homeschooling, and teaching her oldest 4 children how to read, Stefanie knew she needed a different method of teaching reading for her 5th child. So after much research and testing, she developed the ABC, See, Hear, Do method. And we know on this podcast, you love actionable strategies and we love to bring them to you. So today's episode is perfect to give you those actionable strategies to use as you teach kids in your homeschool how to read. So here's my chat with Stefanie Hohl. I know you're going to love it. Hey, Stefanie, welcome to the Homeschool with Moxie podcast. I'm glad you're here today.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So I loved reading your bio. I had a little chuckle. You're a mom of 5, right?
Yep.
Okay. And as I was reading your bio, I thought, oh my goodness, what she's saying here, my audience is going to relate to. The fact that not all kids learn the same. I'm guessing this is what happened to you. It said after teaching her oldest 4 children how to read, Stefanie knew she needed a different method of teaching reading for her 5th child. And I'm like, oh my word, we all have been there. This is so relatable. So just what was going on there? Why are we all so overwhelmed? It seems like teaching reading should be so easy, but it's so overwhelming. And homeschool moms are right there. We're like, yeah, this is an overwhelming thing.
Yeah. Well, first off, I think so many people think that teaching reading should be easy, that it's like, a kid learns to speak just by speaking, and you think, oh, they should just learn to read by osmosis, but that's not how it works. And teaching a child to read is actually, well, learning to read is a very complex process, and it involves many, many steps. Um, and so it's actually really difficult, and all kids learn differently, as we know. Um, I kind of went down the wrong road with my daughter, my first kid, and kind of forced her to learn to read the way the only way I knew how to teach her, and it did not go well. And then my next 3 kids were actually pretty easy to teach. Like they were okay with just sitting and learning. It wasn't a big deal. And then then I had kid number 5, whole new ball game. He would not sit still. He would not listen. He had zero interest in any type of learning. And I was like, no, there's no way this is going to work. And I was actually in my master's program for education and curriculum instruction. So for my classes, I dove deep into research about teaching reading, like just looking for anything that would help my son. Um, and I couldn't really find what I wanted, like there just didn't seem to be anything that fit his personality and his way of learning. And I had seen a preschool teacher use movement to teach reading, and I was really intrigued by that idea. And so I really was looking for that. And outside of like preschool curriculum that was meant for like a preschool class, I couldn't find anything that was meant for parents like at home with their kids. And I was also interested in being a children's book author. So I wrote my own book and developed my own method. And it worked like magic with my son. Like he picked it up so quickly and easily, like no tears, no frustration. And so I knew I had to share it with other moms.
So you weren't getting your degree because of your issues with teaching your son how to read. You were already in this process of getting a degree, and then it just kind of meshed all together.
Yes, it kind of all my worlds kind of collided together and at the perfect time.
Yes, that's so cool. So why that's interesting. Like, so we think of preschoolers as like, oh, okay, it's okay for them to use a lot of movement. And then somehow we think of school age kids, even if we're homeschooling, no, you need to sit there with me and you need to do this. What, like, so the secret, I'm kind of guessing, is this movement and adding that. Why is that so helpful? Like, what's going on there that makes it so helpful?
Yeah, I think we have a really kind of antiquated view of what school should look like, where it's kids sitting quietly and learning. And that's really not the best way that kids learn. And so adding in movement to learning, it uses different parts of the brain. It creates more neural pathways and it really allows kids to use more of their brain, which just makes learning easier. It makes it easier to retain. It makes it easier to learn. Research shows that adding movement to learning actually increases learning by 90%. Like it's a big deal. It makes it so much easier to learn. And that's exactly what I found with my son. Like as soon as we added movement to learning to read, it just clicked. He was able to retain what he learned. He was able to remember, put it together, and that can really be applied to all types of learning.
So give us an example. Like, so you say you gave him movement added to this learning to read. What does that look like?
So what I did was for each letter of the alphabet, I put an animal and an action with it. So I just did hand motions. So for example, the letter C, you curl your hands like claws and you scratch. So you say, "K." And then the letter A, you throw your hands in the air like you're scared and say, "Ah." And T, you tap the air and say, "T, t, t." And so they're making these motions and doing these things, and it's silly, it's fun, like they laugh and they don't even realize they're learning. Um, so I mean, you can add movement in that way where you're adding actual movements to the things you're learning. But even besides that, if you can't, think of a way to do that, it helps to add movement just in general. So like if your kid is learning spelling words, you can have them jump rope, play hopscotch as they're spelling those words. They can be, tapping the table, jump on the trampoline, whatever. If your body is moving, it's still increasing those neural pathways as they're learning.
Because what do we typically do? Are we just stuck on auditory and visual learning?
I mean, that's the majority of the way we think kids learn. And as adults, I think because adults are just calmer, and so we think, oh, this is how I would learn, so this is how you should learn.
Mm-hmm.
But in truth, kids, I mean, they're going a mile a minute. They have so much energy, and getting that energy out not only helps them focus, it also helps them just create all these new learning pathways.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, I think we do get stuck in these ruts of just visual and auditory, like, hey, sit and look at this, read this, listen to this lecture, whatever. And we kind of forget this whole kinesthetic part where kids are kinesthetic learners, like they need to be moving. Which, as an adult, that can feel exhausting sometimes.
So are all
Um,
kids kinesthetic learners, or are there certain kids who that's more their strength and we're
there's
missing
definitely
out on those
kids,
kids?
yeah, there's definitely kids where, you'll have one kid and they're very strongly visual or they're very strongly auditory. So there still are those differences in kids. It's not that all kids are 100% kinesthetic learners.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for example, my three middle boys that I taught to read, they did just fine sitting there and just having a lesson. They
Mm-hmm.
didn't need to move as much as my youngest son. Granted, moving would have still helped them learn it faster. It would have made it more fun. Um, but there's still plenty of kids that, and you can see that in school. There's plenty of if homeschooling or public school, there's plenty of kids that love worksheets and they love to sit down and listen to a lesson.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there's plenty of kids that doesn't work so well for.
So parents who have this wiggly kid who they're always struggling with the kid doesn't sit still, this is maybe what's missing.
Yes. And if they can embrace that and accept the wiggliness and use the wiggliness for good,
Mm-hmm.
then I think that they will. be much more successful in teaching that child.
Because the more ways you can learn something, the more senses you're using, that's always going to stick more, right? So
Yes,
that kid is being
exactly.
maybe left behind because they're not engaging really how they learn the best. So this is hopeful for parents who are very frustrated with that wiggly kid, but maybe just need to lean into that, as you said. So, you also said like movement can be applied to all areas of learning. Is this like a age specific thing too? Like what ages is this strategy going to work the best for?
I mean, I think it's definitely most helpful for younger kids, under 8, but I honestly think it works for any age. I mean, I even for myself, when I'm listening to a lecture or something, I'm a doodler. I have to be doodling or I can't focus and pay attention. And that's just a form of movement. Um, I've even found when I'm working on my books, I walk on a treadmill with a treadmill desk because adding that movement in helps me focus. And so I honestly think this is valuable for any age, really. Um, as kids get older, they do get better at sitting still and they get better at those listening skills, but there's still plenty of kids that struggle. If they're sitting still, their brain is 10 miles away.
Mhm.
Um, so I really think it's valuable for any age. And obviously, you're not going to maybe have a 15-year-old, doing jumping jacks while they're spelling words, but you can find other ways to incorporate movement into learning.
Mhm. There's a lot of parents who, the struggle is there if your child is not learning to read when you think they should be, at that, kindergarten, first grade age or whatever. Would these methods work for like the older struggling reader too? When they're like 8, 9, and you're like, you guys should know how to read yet. I mean, I'm guessing this will still work for them too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my books I say go through ages 8 just because they're kind of cartoony-ish. And some older kids might be like, "Oh, that seems babyish." However, I've had parents tell me stories about their 11-year-olds that they were like, "We just have to go back to basics." And they use my books, especially if they're a kid with ADHD or autism or, other neurodivergent learners. And they go back to the basics and it clicks for their kid. And adding in that movement was really key. Um, and so, yeah, I think the problem with learning to read is it's such a long process that often kids, when they struggle, they get frustrated. So they don't want to do it anymore.
Mhm.
And then they quickly get behind because at some point you have to switch from learning to read to reading to learn.
Mhm.
And if you're not a strong reader, it affects every area of learning, really. Um, and so I really recommend that parents slow down and make sure that those skills are really rock solid um, before moving on and just expecting your kid to be able to go read a novel or
Mm.
read their math problems or whatever.
You're right. We tend to like, hey, hurry, we got to get to this next skill, but no, it doesn't make sense to do that. It's better to take the time needed. That's a great point. So, what can parents do if they feel overwhelmed or frustrated with this teaching their child to read? This is where a lot of homeschool parents are finding themselves right now. So, what can they do?
Yeah, no, totally. I was right there with them. I always say if you're feeling frustrated, that means it's time to take a step back because once you're frustrated and the child's frustrated, it's not really going to be productive. Um, Whether that's the method to teach the method you're using to teach your child, maybe it's not working, so you can try switching to something else. Your child might not be developmentally ready for what you're trying to teach them at that point. So maybe it might just be a matter of waiting a month or 2 months, working on those really basic foundational skills before trying to move on. Um, so, I mean, especially for young kids, like if you're frustrated, like that's not where you want to be. Like you want learning at that age to be playful, to be fun, to be engaging. And so, my biggest recommendation is just to take a step back, take a breather, realize it's okay. Your child will learn to read. It doesn't have to be today. It's going to be this long process. Um, and that there are other methods out there that will work for your child. And so it's fine. It's really keying in on what your child needs and how you can provide that for them.
So tell us more about ABC See Hear Do. What do you have over there? What is this program all about? And I'm actually interested, would you consider this a full phonics program for homeschool parents, or is this more like supplemental? How would you discuss that?
Yeah, it's a full program. It's a full learn to read program. There are 7 levels. So I separated out uppercase and lowercase because my goal was to make it as simple as possible. So each step is like, bite size because it builds confidence in kids because, as soon as a kid gets frustrated, they think, oh, reading's hard. I don't want to do that. I don't like reading.
Mhm.
So I tried to really make it, as simple as possible so that they're building their confidence and they're saying, "Oh, I can do this. Like this is fun. I got this. I'm successful at this. Let's keep going." So there's uppercase letters, lowercase, and then blended beginning sounds, blended ending sounds, long vowels, sight words, and then irregular sounds, which is kind of all those other funny things English does.
Mhm.
Um, And then we have a lot of supplemental materials like writing practice, coloring books, early readers, because most early readers are way too hard for kids, which also leads to a lot of frustration with reading because they're just full of words that kids can't actually read. And then they're like, oh, reading is hard. I can't do it. So our early readers only have words that the child knows how to read from that level. Flashcards, and we have 2 curriculum books. That's kind of like you could do it like a preschool story time or like it's really flexible. There's tons of craft ideas, activity ideas, things like that. And our website, we have tons of free ideas to help. Like if you have a wiggly kid and they love sensory activities, we've got loads of ideas on there. Or if your kid loves crafts, we've got loads of ideas on there. So um, it is a full curriculum where your child can start at the very beginning and progress and learn to read.
So are there like so parents are going to wonder like is there something that explains how to use it? Is there a teacher book or is it more simple than that where it's like intuitive and you just learn like help walk your child through the book? I'm not sure how to
Um,
you know
yeah, no, each
ask that
book
question.
has a page at the front of it that explains how to use it.
Mhm.
Um, but it's really simple and it's really flexible. So literally a parent can pick up the book and 2 minutes later can be working on it with their child.
Mhm.
Um, you can practice just all the letter sounds. You can work on the word pages. You can do, like I even say, you can teach your child to read in a minute a day. Like you can work on one letter sound a night.
Mhm.
And then, at the end of the week, see if they can blend those sounds together and read a word. If they can't, just keep working on those letter sounds or skip the word part, just do the letter sounds. So there's a lot of ways to use it. Super easy for parents. Like that was my number one goal.
Mhm.
Make it easy for parents. Because when you have a lot of kids and you get to your fifth kid and you're worrying about all your older kids, you don't have time to spend hours teaching your child to read. Like you really don't. So this is supposed to be quick, easy, fun, silly. All the siblings can do it together. There's little 18-month-olds that love doing the motions. They just, it's fun.
That makes a lot of sense. All right. So, any final encouragement here or even action steps for moms who are overwhelmed with teaching their kids how to read? What should they do today?
Okay. So action steps would be one, think hard about your specific child and the way they learn and what they need. And if they are wiggly and they need to move, then definitely incorporate movement. Um, and then my next piece of advice is to really just break it down into small, simple steps and be patient. Because honestly, learning to read is really complex. It's not going to happen overnight. They have to learn phonics, they have to learn decoding, they have to learn comprehension, they have to learn, all these things. So, um, really just be patient and have faith that your child will learn. They will get there. They will learn to read, and it's all going to be okay.
That's kind of what we all need to hear. That's what the moms really needed to hear. But that was excellent advice too along those lines. So, where can listeners find you online? Where should we go?
Our website is ABC and then the word SEE, here do.com. It's the same for Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, all the things, ABC, see, hear, do. Or I have a website and TikTok under my name as well, StefanieHohl.com. So, yeah.
Awesome. Stefanie, thank you for sharing with us today. We appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me.